What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
This is the story of Karina Saunders, and like everyone else on this channel, she deserves justice and her story to be told. I will warn you, however, this is an extremely disturbing case, and should you decide to do more research into it, she deserves to be remembered. However, many other videos on YouTube go into the gruesome details, and I would rather focus on Karina rather than the tragic events after she vanished. Karina Saunders was just 19 years old when her life was tragically cut short. On October 13, 2011, her body was discovered in a duffel bag behind a grocery store in Bethany, Oklahoma. The shocking nature of the crime captured national attention, but more than a decade later, the mystery of her death remains unsolved. Despite some arrests, witness statements, and chilling rumors, no one has been held responsible for her murder. Karina was a vibrant young woman with a warm personality, and she was well-liked by those who knew her. However, in the months leading up to her death, she became involved with people involved in risky behaviors, including drugs and other criminal activity. Her family noticed changes in her behavior. She became more distant and was often not at home. Still, no one could have predicted the tragic turn her life would take. Karina was last seen alive on September 28, 2011, in Oklahoma City. Witnesses reported seeing her get into a red pickup truck outside the Newcastle casino. She appeared nervous, perhaps even fearful. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. For the next 2 weeks, Karina's family had no contact with her. She didn't call or post on social media. Then, on October 13th, her body was found, mutilated, and placed in a duffel bag behind an abandoned grocery store. The discovery of her body left investigators stunned. Karina had been bound, and her head was missing. Her arms and legs had been separated. While it was difficult to determine the exact cause of death, the extreme violence suggested that the murder was personal. Within weeks of her body being found, multiple tips, rumors, and witness statements emerged. Some people claimed that Karina had been involved in human trafficking, possibly as a victim. One person alleged that she had been forced into sex work. Another witness stated that they had seen a video of Karina being tortured. In this video, they claimed she was tied up and harmed in a disturbing way. However, the video was never produced, and the reliability of the witness was later questioned. In 2012, 2 men, Luis Ruiz and Jimmy Massey, were arrested. Both had criminal backgrounds and were believed to be linked to a trafficking operation in the Oklahoma City area. Investigators thought Karina might have been killed in a house in Oklahoma City before her body was transported to Bethany and left behind the grocery store. Some reports suggested that Ruiz and Massey were linked to the supposed torture video, though that video was never publicly released. However, in a surprising turn, the charges against both men were dropped. The district attorney's office cited a lack of physical evidence to charge them, and the witness who claimed to have seen the video was considered unreliable. Ruiz and Massey would later sue for wrongful arrest and received a settlement. The case grew cold, leads slowed down, and key witnesses recanted or changed their stories. Karina's family was left without answers. So, what exactly happened to Karina Saunders? Over the years, various theories have emerged. Some believe Karina's murder was linked to a human trafficking ring. Maybe she was targeted because she knew too much, or perhaps she was trying to leave a dangerous situation. Others think the murder was more personal, an act of violence committed by someone who had a personal connection to her. And there are even theories that suggest she may have been mistaken for someone else, or that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 2020, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation renewed their focus on the case. They released a composite sketch of a man seen near the area at the time Karina disappeared, hoping that someone might recognize him. Though the man was never labeled as a suspect, investigators believed he might have crucial information. Along with the sketch, a $10,000 reward for tips leading to an arrest was reintroduced. Despite renewed attention, the case remained unsolved. To further raise awareness, the OSBI also distributed decks of playing cards in Oklahoma prisons, each one featuring a different cold case victim. Karina's face was included in the deck. The hope was that someone with information might come forward. Karina's family has never given up on finding the truth. Her mother, Margie Queen, has been especially vocal about the mishandling of the case and has demanded answers. She's spoken out publicly, attended hearings, and even worked with filmmakers on a documentary to highlight the gaps in the investigation. Her mother believes that Karina's death was not random, but a targeted attack designed to send a message to others. So, where does the case stand now? As of today, no one has been charged with Karina Saunders' murder. Luis Ruiz and Jimmy Massey remain free. The man in the composite sketch has never been publicly identified, and Karina's family is still waiting for justice. The case has left many questions unanswered. Was Karina murdered because she was involved in a dangerous world of human trafficking? Or was the motive something else, perhaps a personal vendetta? Whatever the truth is, someone out there knows what happened to Karina Saunders. If you have any information that could help solve this case, you're encouraged to contact the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-522-8017 or email tips@ospi.ok.gov. Your tip could be the one that finally brings justice to Karina and her family. Remember that every case matters. Every victim deserves to have their story told, and every person deserves justice. Elmore City, Oklahoma, October 1st, 1976. It was just past midnight when 20-year-old Jimmy Robinson pulled into the driveway of his parents' modest home in Elmore City, Oklahoma. The fall air was still, the neighborhood quiet. Inside the house, the lights were still on. His mother was waiting up for him. Jimmy had always been close to his family, especially his mother. That night, October 1st, 1976, was the last time anyone in the Robinson family would see him. Jimmy was days away from turning 21. He had been living about an hour away, in Moore, Oklahoma, renting a small room while working a new job as a car salesman in Del City. The job was going well. He was upbeat about getting his first paycheck and had even been trusted with a vehicle from the lot, a dark green and white 1974 Toyota Celica. That car would later be the only trace left of Jimmy. When he arrived at the Elmore City house just after midnight, he wasn't alone. A man was waiting for him in the passenger seat of the Celica. Jimmy came inside by himself, greeting his mother with a smile. It wasn't unusual for him to stop by, even late at night. He told her he just needed a favor. Could she switch his laundry over from the washer to the dryer? He wanted clean clothes to wear to work the next day. He didn't plan to stay long. "I've got to drop this guy off," Jimmy told her, referencing the unknown man still sitting in the car outside. "I'll be back in 30 minutes. It was around 12:30 a.m. when he walked back out the door and drove off into the night. He never came back. When morning came and Jimmy still hadn't returned, his mother knew something was wrong. It wasn't like him to vanish, especially with his fresh start in Del City and excitement about the new job. She waited for a phone call. She checked the roads, But as hours turned to days and days to weeks, there were no signs of Jimmy, only questions. Sometime later, the Celica was found abandoned in Oklahoma City on Shields Boulevard. There was no sign of foul play inside the car, but no clue as to what had happened, either. The vehicle, which had been on loan from his dealership employer, had clearly been left behind. But by who and why? The identity of the man who had been waiting in the passenger seat that night remains a mystery. No one in Jimmy's family or inner circle ever reported knowing him. Police never publicly identified him, nor do we know if he was ever questioned. It was as if Jimmy had driven off into thin air with a stranger and was never seen again. Jimmy's short life had already seen its fair share of struggles. He was the oldest of 6 kids, a boy who took on responsibilities early. During his junior year of high school, he dropped out after his girlfriend became pregnant. They got married, but the relationship didn't last. By the time he was 18, Jimmy was divorced and trying to find direction. He joined the Army in 1974, but his military stint was brief, just about a year. After leaving the service, he floated between jobs until landing the sales position in Del City. According to his family, he was genuinely optimistic about the opportunity. He had a spark again. His brother later said Jimmy was talking about setting some things straight in his life, planning for the future, saving money, working hard. That's part of what made his disappearance so baffling. He wasn't someone in deep trouble. He had no known enemies, and there was nothing to suggest he had reason to run. Did Jimmy know the man he was with that night? Or was the passenger a customer from the car dealership? Maybe someone he was giving a ride home? Was Jimmy lured into a trap? Or did something go terribly wrong during what should have been a routine drop-off? The location where the Toyota was found, in Oklahoma City, roughly 60 miles from where Jimmy had been last seen, only deepened the mystery. No reports of suspicious activity. No witnesses. No body. Just silence. The Robinson family reported Jimmy missing, but like many adult disappearances in the 1970s, it didn't receive urgent attention. Adults were presumed to have the right to go off on their own. Unless there was direct evidence of a crime, police were often slow to act. Decades later, the case remains cold. Jimmy's mother never gave up hope that her son would come home. She kept his room ready for years, holding onto his clothes, his photos, and her belief that he might walk back through the door one day. Over time, that hope turned to heartbreak. His siblings, now grown with children of their own, still remember their big brother's sense of humor and kindness. The pain of his absence is a wound that never fully closed. Today, Jimmy Robinson would be in his late 60s. He has missed birthdays, weddings, holidays. He vanished just as adulthood was beginning, on the edge of turning 21, with plans and dreams and a job he liked. Somewhere, someone knows what happened. Maybe the man in the car that night. Maybe someone at the dealership. Maybe someone who helped hide something they shouldn't have. His case remains open, but there have been no leads in years. No suspects named. No arrests made. On the warm, waning evening of September 19th, 1984, 17-year-old Sandy Pathrisa Ray stepped out of her friend's house in Shawnee, Oklahoma, with nothing but a simple goal: to walk a few blocks to buy cigarettes. She told her friend she'd be back soon, that it wouldn't take long. Her tone was casual, her plans unremarkable, just a quick errand. But Sandy never came back, and nearly 4 decades later, no one has seen her since. Born in 1966, Sandy Ray was the kind of teenager who left a lasting impression. Friends remembered her as strong-willed, loyal, and nurturing. Teachers saw potential in her. Despite coming from a fractured home, her parents had divorced just a few years earlier, Sandy had adapted with remarkable maturity. Her mother, Carol Ray, later described her daughter as a second mother to her younger siblings. Sandy was fiercely protective of them, stepping into a caretaking role that no one asked her to fill, but she assumed with love. She had recently moved out of her mother's house in 1984 and was staying with a classmate's family nearby. Despite this, she visited her own family often, never staying away too long from her little brothers and sisters. Sandy was still deeply connected to her roots, not the kind of teen to just vanish without a trace or without saying goodbye. She wasn't a runaway. Her family would insist. But convincing the police of that would be another matter entirely. Sandy had been staying near the intersection of Highland Street and Bryan Road. That Wednesday night, when she realized she was out of cigarettes, she told her friend she'd take a quick walk to the nearby convenience store. She didn't take her purse. She left behind her belongings, including new clothes she had just bought. On her way, a car full of familiar faces pulled up. It was a few of her friends offering a ride. She accepted. Instead of going to the store, Sandy asked to be dropped off at the Windsor bowling alley, where her cousin Jerry Doyle worked. Jerry would later tell authorities that Sandy visited with him briefly before asking if he could take her to buy cigarettes. But Jerry was on shift and couldn't leave. He remembered her making several phone calls from the bowling alley, trying to find someone else to pick her up. No one knows for sure who she talked to. She told one friend she wanted to go to a party that night, but the friend said she wasn't allowed to go. Sandy didn't give up. She said she'd try to find someone else. At around 8:30 or 9 p.m., Sandy left the bowling alley on foot. Witnesses saw her walk off with an unidentified person. That person has never been positively identified, and Sandy never came home. When Sandy's friends and family couldn't reach her later that night or the next day, concern quickly turned to alarm. Carol Ray reported her daughter missing to the Shawnee Police Department, but their response was frustratingly casual. To them, Sandy was just another rebellious teenager, probably a runaway, they said, and likely to return on her own terms. Carol insisted otherwise. She's never gone this long without calling, she told officers. She didn't take her purse. She just bought new clothes. Why would she leave them behind? No one listened. In the eyes of law enforcement, Sandy was a legal adult by November of that year. She turned 18 on November 25th, and that seemed to erase any urgency from her case. Still, months later, when there was still no word from Sandy, authorities quietly changed her classification from runaway to missing adult. Yet they made it clear they didn't want to blow it out of proportion. There was no evidence of foul play, they claimed. There was no proof of anything. While the police lost momentum, Carol Ray only became more determined. She knew her daughter, knew that if Sandy could contact her, she would have. She believed her daughter had been murdered. But by who? To stay close to the undercurrents of a Shawnee criminal world, Carol made an unusual and bold decision. She became a bail bondsman. Her motive was clear: stay close to the people Sandy had known and to those who had been in and out of jail. Sandy had been a good student and never in trouble with the law herself, but some of the people she associated with were known criminals. Carol believed one of them held the answer. Over the years, rumors swirled. One persistent theory pointed to Danny McLeod, an ex-boyfriend of Sandy's who had taken a breakup badly. Some claimed that he killed Sandy and buried her in the basement of his house. Law enforcement investigated thoroughly, even going so far as to conduct ground-penetrating radar scans in 1992, but found no evidence of a burial. Danny passed a polygraph test and was eventually ruled out as a suspect. But Sandy was still gone. Time moved forward. Sandy's name faded from headlines. Then, in 2012, nearly 28 years after Sandy vanished, there was a new sliver of hope. An old friend of Sandy's began poking around the internet, driven by nagging curiosity and heartache. She stumbled upon NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. There, she found a record for a partial skull discovered in Pottawatomie County in November 2007, not far from where Sandy was last seen. The skull belonged to a young woman, estimated between 14 and 30 years old. The friend reached out to a forensic anthropologist with the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner's Office, and DNA testing was arranged. Samples from Carol and Sandy's sister Brandy were submitted. When the results came back, it wasn't Sandy. The skull remains unidentified as of 2024. But for Carol and Brandy, it wasn't a dead end, it was a start. Their DNA was now in the system, meaning any future unidentified remains could be cross-checked. It offered a glimmer of progress in a case that had gone ice cold. In 2013, Sandy's family raised money to erect a billboard in Shawnee, keeping her face and name in the public eye. Social media campaigns followed, generating fresh interest and new tips. Detective work resumed in earnest. Shawnee Police SGT Greg Gibson admitted he believed Sandy had been killed, but until her body was found or someone confessed, the case would officially remain a missing person investigation. That same year, a tip came in. Someone claimed they knew where Sandy's body was buried. The location was near railroad tracks outside town. Police brought in the crime scene archaeology recovery group, and a full dig was conducted. Nothing was found. Despite the risks she sometimes took, hitchhiking, partying with the wrong crowd, Sandy Ray was no wild child. She was voted president of Shawnee High School's Vocational Industrial Club of America. She worked in local restaurants. She was building a life, albeit a complicated one, in the wake of personal upheaval. She had ambition. She was present for her family. She had plans. And then, in a single night, she disappeared. In 2015, Detective Ronnie Wilson was assigned Sandy's case. He approached it like a fresh investigation, re-interviewing friends, old boyfriends, former neighbors. He acknowledged publicly that at least one person he spoke with had lied about something related to the case. He believed the truth would eventually emerge. As of 2025, more than 200 people have been interviewed in connection with Sandy's disappearance. No arrests have been made. No suspects have been officially named, and no remains have ever been found. What happened to Sandy Ray after she walked away from the Windsor bowling alley that night? Who was she with? Did she willingly go to a party, never knowing the danger ahead? Was it someone she trusted, or was it a stranger? Sandy Pathrisa Ray was 5 feet 2 inches, weighed 110 pounds, and had light brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a gray crop t-shirt, pink jogging pants, and flip-flops. Despite years of heartbreak, her family has never stopped looking for her. If you know anything about the disappearance of Sandy Ray, no matter how insignificant it may seem, contact the Shawnee Police Department at 405-273-2121, because someone out there knows the truth. And 40 years is far too long to keep a secret. In May of 2018, Kristen Sue Richardson was preparing for a weekend she had been looking forward to for months. A longtime fan of hard rock and metal, she had made plans to attend Rocklahoma, the massive 3-day outdoor rock music festival held annually in Pryor, Oklahoma. That year's lineup included her favorite band, Hailstorm, and Kristen had been vocal about how excited she was to see them perform live. But Kristen would never make it to the festival. Or if she did, no one can prove it. What happened between her final preparations and the time she was reported missing remains an unsolved mystery, and one that points to foul play, deception, and the lingering suspicion that those closest to her may know more than they are saying. Kristen Richardson was 42 years old when she disappeared. Known to friends and family for her free-spirited personality and love of music, she lived in Muskogee, Oklahoma, sharing a home on Houston Street with 2 roommates, Carl Jean Bryce and Cody Ray Campbell. The house was located on the city's east side in a quiet, residential neighborhood filled with modest single-story homes, chain-link fences, and aging shade trees. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the property. But just weeks later, it would become the focal point of a suspected homicide investigation. According to Carl Bryce, Kristen left Muskogee with him on May 25, 2018, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. They were supposedly headed to Pryor, about an hour's drive northwest, to attend Rocklahoma. Carl later told investigators that Kristen left the festival grounds with an unidentified woman shortly after arriving. That was the last time he claimed that he saw her. But almost immediately, inconsistencies appeared in Carl's version of events. When police reviewed Kristen's cell phone data, they discovered a crucial contradiction. Her phone never left Muskogee. It did not ping near Pryor, and there was no evidence that she had traveled to Rocklahoma at all. Her last known communications and geolocation placed her near her home on Houston Street, where Carl Bryce and Cody Ray Campbell also lived. Kristen was not reported missing for more than 6 weeks. The report was eventually filed by her sister, who told police she had been trying to contact Kristen without success and was deeply concerned. The delay in reporting her missing was troubling, and it drew attention to the people who had seen her last, her roommates. Why hadn't either of them contacted police? Why had they waited silently, as if nothing were wrong? When law enforcement began their investigation in earnest in July 2018, they quickly found reasons to suspect that Kristen's disappearance involved more than just a misunderstanding or personal decision to vanish. It wasn't long before investigators learned that Carl Bryce had been using Kristen's state-issued benefits card, an Oklahoma Access card, after she disappeared. Surveillance footage and transaction records confirmed he had used the card at local stores. In fact, Kristen's belongings had also been sold or given away by her roommates during the weeks after she vanished. To police, this behavior did not suggest someone who believed Kristen had simply gone off with a friend or left town for a new life. On the contrary, it indicated an unsettling level of confidence that Kristen was not coming back. Bryce and Campbell both denied any involvement in her disappearance, but their explanations were vague and inconsistent. In the absence of any concrete evidence, suspicions grew. Then came a chilling tip, one that would shift the case dramatically. During interviews with law enforcement, Cody Ray Campbell told investigators that his roommate, Carl Bryce, had confessed to stabbing Kristen to death. The alleged murder, he said, took place in their shared home on Houston Street. He claimed Bryce had later disposed of her body in the backyard, burying her in a shallow grave. Campbell even directed investigators to a specific location in the backyard, the northwest corner. There, officers found freshly disturbed earth, and more alarmingly, the odor of human decomposition. They immediately requested a warrant to search the property more thoroughly. Law enforcement teams descended on the home, scouring the interior and exterior of the property, using cadaver dogs and specialized equipment to detect buried remains or other forensic evidence. Despite the apparent signs, soil disturbance, the smell of decay, and the eyewitness tip, no body was found. It is unclear how deep the excavation went or what limitations may have affected the search. Still, the tip was taken seriously. Investigators concluded that Kristen Richardson was likely the victim of a homicide, and her disappearance was reclassified as a murder investigation. That same day, on July 20th, 2018, the Muskogee County District Attorney's Office filed first-degree murder charges, but not against a named individual. Instead, the charges were filed against a John Doe defendant. This legal maneuver allowed the case to proceed and signaled that law enforcement believed they had enough evidence to support the theory that Kristen had been murdered, even if they were not yet ready or able to name her killer. For reasons that remain unclear to the public, no arrests were made at that time in connection with the murder charge. Meanwhile, other legal issues emerged. Both Carl Bryce and Cody Ray Campbell were arrested and charged in connection with a separate crime involving a stolen vehicle. That stolen car was discovered at the Houston Street residence where the three had lived together. The charges were not related directly to Kristen's case, but gave prosecutors an opportunity to hold both men in custody while the murder investigation continued. Campbell was ultimately convicted in the stolen vehicle case and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Bryce's case was still active as of 2024, but he remained unindicted in Kristen Richardson's disappearance or presumed death. The community of Muskogee and Kristen's family were left with a growing sense of frustration. They had what seemed to be a compelling account of what happened. An eyewitness claiming Carl Bryce killed her, physical signs that supported that account, and behavior from the roommates that pointed to knowledge of her death. Yet no charges had been brought forward, and Kristen's body had never been recovered. Over time, the case grew colder. Media coverage slowed. Local articles stopped being published. Tips dried up, but Kristen's family never stopped asking questions. They have repeatedly urged law enforcement to search the property again, believing that Kristen's remains may still be hidden on or near the Houston Street home. Others have called for renewed public attention to the case, fearing that what little momentum existed in 2018 has now faded entirely. It's worth noting that Muskogee, like many smaller cities in Oklahoma, faces challenges when it comes to resources for long-term missing person investigations. With limited manpower and funding, even cases classified as homicides can sometimes stall if no new evidence surfaces. For Kristen's family, That reality is painful. They have held out hope that one day Kristen's body will be found, that someone will come forward with new information, or that authorities will pursue charges based on what has already been uncovered. But as of April 2025, Kristen Richardson's remains have never been located. Heath Reams was just 26 years old when he vanished on July 27, 2003, and there are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding this case that leave you scratching your head. Let's break it all down and take a deep dive into what we know. Heath Reams was staying with two friends, Amanda Sanders Bolsted and Todd Ross, while he was going through a divorce. On the morning of July 27th, he reportedly left their home at 7 a.m. and was never seen or heard from again. What makes this immediately suspicious is that he didn't take any of his money, credit cards, clothing, nothing. It was like he just walked out and vanished into thin air. His mother reported him missing on August 2nd, nearly a week later, and that delay in itself is alarming. Why didn't his friends report him missing sooner? That's the first red flag. 5 months later, on November 3rd, 2003, Heath's white 1997 Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned in a pasture just 3 miles east of Jennings. The vehicle was locked, and inside were some of his personal belongings, including a briefcase and CDs. There was no immediate evidence of foul play in or around the car. But let's be real, just because there's no blood or damage doesn't mean something sinister didn't happen. The vehicle had a broken antenna, a football-shaped University of Oklahoma plate on the front, and a license plate number PVP 676. The location where it was found raises eyebrows. Why would he leave his vehicle locked in the middle of a pasture unless someone else put it there? At the time of his disappearance, Heath was working for Skinner Tank and frequently traveled to other states for work, including Nebraska, Colorado, and Wisconsin. His family initially thought maybe he just needed some time alone to cope with the stress of his divorce. But as time passed with no contact, their concern grew. Heath wasn't the type of guy to cut off communication, especially not with his young son. That silence spoke volumes, and the family's worst fears started to feel more and more likely. Fast forward to September 2012, nearly a decade after Heath disappeared, and Amanda Sanders Bolsted, one of the last people to see him alive, was charged with his murder. Even though Heath's body was never found, investigators believed that he had been beaten to death with a baseball bat. Let that sink in for a moment. No body, no crime scene, no forensic evidence from the vehicle, and yet they charge her with murder. Amanda already had a lengthy rap sheet. She had prior convictions for forgery, concealing stolen property, credit card fraud, and meth possession. She was already serving time in prison when the murder charge came down, and in August 2015, she pled guilty, not to murder, but to manslaughter. She was sentenced to 25 years, with 20 of those years suspended. Now let's talk about this plea deal, because it's where things get murky. The prosecutors ended up filing to revoke the suspended portion of her sentence because she didn't inform them when she changed residences. But it begs the question, what was the actual evidence against her? Why would she take a plea deal to manslaughter if there wasn't substantial evidence tying her to the crime? On the flip side, why didn't the state go all the way and prosecute her for murder if they believe she killed Heath with a baseball bat? Amanda's criminal record is definitely sketchy. There's no arguing that. But until this charge, she had no known history of violent offenses. So how did law enforcement conclude that she not only killed Heath, but did it with a baseball bat? If this happened in or around the time he went missing, why didn't they find any blood, DNA, or damage in the vehicle? And if it didn't happen in the vehicle, then where did it happen? Was there a witness? Someone who came forward with testimony years later? From what we can gather, there was indeed some kind of sealed witness testimony, and the indictment indicated that the murder likely took place on July 26, 2003, possibly a day before Heath was last reported seen. According to the Oklahoma Attorney General's office, Heath's body was never found, but the evidence, which still hasn't been made public in full detail, must have been compelling enough to get that indictment. Maybe it was jailhouse informant testimony, or perhaps someone close to Amanda finally talked after years of silence. But even then, it's still a mystery why she would plead guilty to a crime that could land her in prison for years, unless the evidence was a real threat. At the time Amanda was charged in 2012, Heath's son was around 14 years old. By now, he's an adult, probably still carrying the weight of losing his father under such strange circumstances. The family, understandably frustrated, eventually gave up repeatedly contacting authorities. They had been waiting nearly a decade for answers, only to be left with more questions after Amanda's conviction. The plea deal might have offered some closure in a legal sense, but emotionally, it left a lot to be desired. It's worth noting that this case is one of those rare instances where someone is convicted in connection to a disappearance without a body and without public evidence of a crime scene. That is highly unusual. Most of the time in missing persons cases, even when there's a main suspect, authorities hesitate to press charges unless they have solid physical evidence. But here, they charged and convicted someone based on information we don't even have access to. It raises questions not only about Amanda's guilt, but also about the integrity of the process. Was justice really served? Or was this a convenient conviction to put an end to a long, cold case? Let's not forget that Amanda was already in prison when she was charged. So some might argue she had nothing to lose by taking the plea. But others would say she had everything to lose, especially if she was innocent. If she didn't do it and only pled to manslaughter to avoid a murder trial and possible life sentence, then that would be a devastating miscarriage of justice. On the flip side, if she really did kill Heath, why hasn't she ever told anyone where his body is? That's the kind of detail that might have helped her negotiate a better deal or show some remorse. The fact that Heath has never been found only deepens the pain for his family. At the end of the day, foul play is the most likely scenario in Heath's disappearance. That much is almost certain. It's uncharacteristic for him to just up and leave without telling anyone, especially his son. But the question remains, was Amanda Saunders Bolstad truly the one responsible, or is the real perpetrator still out there? If you have any information about what happened to Heath Reams, now is the time to come forward. Contact the Payne County Sheriff's Office at 405-372-4522. And if Amanda wasn't the one who did it, then someone out there got away with murder, and that's not okay. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, May 26, 1982, it began like any ordinary morning. A young mother named Sally Rawlings woke up in her downtown hotel room at the Kirkpatrick Hotel. She prepared breakfast for her 2-year-old daughter, Kimberly, helped her get dressed, and the pair walked hand in hand to the daycare nearby. Sally dropped Kimberly off and told her she'd see her after work. It was a routine the two had followed for weeks. But that afternoon, Sally never came back. By the time the daycare center closed, the staff began calling the numbers they had for Sally. She didn't answer. Eventually, per policy, the center director took Kimberly home with her. It was the beginning of a mystery that would span years, and a criminal investigation that would lead to a murder conviction, despite one key missing element. Sally's body has never been found. Sally and Rawlings had once believed in love. In 1976, she met Gary Lee Rawlings, a charismatic commercial airline pilot. The two married a year later, and in 1980, they welcomed their only child, Kimberly. On the outside, the couple seemed to be living a typical American life. But behind closed doors, the truth was more grim. Gary had a volatile temper. There were beatings, emotional abuse, a cycle that became unbearable for Sally. In January 1982, after enduring years of Gary's aggression, Sally made the brave decision to leave. She took Kimberly and moved into a shelter for battered women. There, she filed for divorce. A court granted it just a month later. Sally received full custody of Kimberly, and Gary was ordered not to contact or visit his daughter for 6 months. Determined to rebuild her life, Sally found a new home at the Kirkpatrick Hotel in Oklahoma City and got a job as a secretary for the Kerr-McGee Corporation. She enrolled Kimberly in a daycare program and did her best to create stability for her daughter. But the scars from her past still lingered. According to co-workers, Sally was polite but distant. She avoided making close friends and sometimes appeared to speak quietly to herself. Whether these behaviors were signs of trauma, anxiety, or paranoia is unclear, but they left an impression on those around her. Gary Rawlings, meanwhile, was living with his parents in Colorado. Despite the court's order, he remained fixated on his ex-wife and child. In May 1982, he made a series of curious moves. He traveled from Colorado to Oklahoma City and stayed at a hotel on May 24th and 25th. While in the city, he rented a Plymouth Fury and purchased a .44 Magnum handgun, claiming he intended to go squirrel hunting. His interest in wildlife was suspect, considering he was in the heart of a city and the caliber of the weapon was excessive for small game. What seemed more telling, however, was a phone call placed to Kimberly's daycare. A man identifying himself as her father asked, "What happens if Sally doesn't pick up Kimberly this evening?" When told that the center's director would care for the child in that event, the man hung up. Gary had also made repeated attempts throughout May to rent a small plane from Charter Air in Oklahoma City. 5 times he booked a flight and canceled. On the 6th attempt, at 10 a.m. on May 26th, the very day Sally disappeared, he finally followed through. He rented a Cessna 150 and took off into the skies. He wouldn't return the plane until the early morning hours of May 27th. Investigators later reconstructed Gary's flight plan. On the afternoon of May 26th, he landed for fuel in Dallas, Texas. While there, he made a call to the daycare center again, stating that Sally wouldn't be able to pick up Kimberly and that he, Gary, would be retrieving the child instead. While in Dallas, he also purchased velour cleaner, an odd purchase for a man supposedly en route for a pleasure flight. Later that same day, Gary stopped to refuel again, this time at an airport near Houston. One employee who serviced the aircraft noticed a large cloth-wrapped bundle in the baggage compartment of the plane. Gary didn't offer an explanation for the bundle, and the employee didn't ask questions. That night, Gary refueled again near Houston and then returned to Oklahoma City by the next morning, touching down in the early hours of May 27th. Upon returning the Cessna, the rental company noticed some strange details. The gas cap was missing, as was part of the carpeting inside the aircraft. Whether these items were lost accidentally or deliberately removed was never clarified. What was clear was that something had taken place during that flight, something Gary was trying to cover up. After landing, Gary returned the Plymouth Fury he had been using and asked for a new vehicle, claiming the Plymouth had starting problems. Employees at the rental agency didn't notice any issues with the car, but they did notice that the mat lining the trunk was gone. Shortly after, Gary went to a local moving company and arranged to have Sally's belongings shipped to Denver, Colorado. He claimed she had moved there ahead of him. Around lunchtime, he visited Kimberly's daycare and presented a typed letter, supposedly written by Sally, stating she had moved to Florida with a new boyfriend and that Gary would now have full custody of their daughter. Staff at the daycare, trusting the letter, released Kimberly into her father's care. On June 3rd, Kerr McGee, the company where Sally worked, received a resignation letter from her. It was typewritten and carried her name. But when investigators later examined it, they found something suspicious. It hadn't been typed on any of the machines Sally had access to at work or at the hotel. In fact, it matched a typewriter found at Gary's own workplace. One of Gary's coworkers even testified that he had seen Gary using that specific typewriter on May 30th. After returning to Colorado with Kimberly, Gary phoned his mother from the airport, asking her to bring him his work uniform. When she met him, she noticed he was traveling light. Just a blue suitcase and a plastic bag with Kimberly's things. Gone was the sleeping bag he had taken with him days earlier. Gary told his mother that Sally had gone to Florida with a new boyfriend and had given him permission to keep Kimberly for a while. His mother, Loretta, was troubled by the situation. When she looked inside the suitcase, her concern deepened. Inside were the .44 Magnum handgun with 5 cartridges fired. Let her stow the Kirkpatrick Hotel and Moving Company, bearing Sally's forged signature. The can of velour cleaner. Sally's swear keys and her savings deposit book. Kimberly's birth certificate. A car rental receipt. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Loretta took the suitcase to her daughter's home and then contacted the police. She told them she believed her son had murdered his ex-wife. Her call opened the door to what would become a meticulous and deeply chilling investigation. A forensic examination of the Plymouth Fury revealed blood traces inside the driver's area and in the trunk. More blood was found in the baggage compartment of the rented Cessna, and still more on the .44 Magnum handgun. Although DNA testing wasn't yet available, blood typing narrowed the source to a small portion of the population, just 0.46%, and it did not match Gary. It could have been Sally's. Ballistics experts confirmed that the gun found in Gary's suitcase had been fired 5 times since it was last cleaned. Fingerprints found on a forged envelope matched Gary's. A palm print on a money order used to arrange the moving truck also belonged to him. Though Sally's body was never recovered, prosecutors theorized that Gary had lured her under false pretenses, murdered her with the .44 Magnum, placed her body into a sleeping bag, and then used the rented plane to fly over the Gulf of Mexico and dispose of her remains. At trial, Gary's defense claimed Sally had simply walked away, possibly due to emotional distress, and abandoned her daughter. They presented her earlier signs of anxiety and isolation as supporting evidence. But her family and co-workers rejected that theory outright. Sally, they said, would never have willingly left Kimberly in Gary's hands. In 1987, 5 years after Sally vanished, Gary Lee Rawlings was convicted of first-degree murder. Despite the absence of a body, the circumstantial evidence, meticulously built and reinforced by witness testimony, physical evidence, and Gary's own actions, was overwhelming. He was sentenced to life in prison. Kimberly was raised by Sally's family. To this day, Sally Rawlings' remains have never been located. No grave, no physical closure. But the conviction stands, a rare and haunting example of a murder prosecuted successfully without a body. Sally Rawlings was 34 years old when she vanished. She was a mother, a survivor of domestic abuse, and a woman working hard to reclaim her life.